Scott, I'll start with you. I thought like one of the main impressions I had both in the interview and prior to it is that the Prime Minister doesn't feel as though he is, I think, constrained by things that in the past have constrained politicians. But very quickly, for example, the day after the interview was taped, we found out that other members of his cabinet were openly saying things that contradicted the positions that he had taken. How different do you think he will be able to govern up against the kind of stuff and the way that he talks about now?
Very different. Very different from the past, I think, for two reasons. One, our circumstance. We are actually in a set of crisis conditions. And when you take a look at the need to rewire our relationship with the United States, all that's at threat, all that's at risk economically, security-wise. I mean, obviously, that's what carried Mr. Carney into office, and he's not confused about that. So I do think when he says he's going to move boldly, he's going to move quickly, he intends to do just that. And so when he talks, for example, with you about pipelines and energy infrastructure, I don't think he's just going to be looking for consensus. I think he's going to be forging consensus, and I think he's going to be forging ahead. And if, Stephen Guilbeault or others decide that they have doubts about that, they're going to have to occupy themselves with those doubts, because I don't think the boss is going to have much patience for it. I don't think you'll be seeing a contradiction of that kind happen very often again. So I think that's the number one reason. I think the second reason, Mark Carney himself. He's the kind of guy that likes to, bang the gavel and move ahead. And I think that will be true for his cabinet, for his caucus, and for the country.
How much of a challenge do you think he'll face in that regard? And I'll use the example, Corey, of Minister Guilbeault, right, who did essentially say we don't need new pipelines right out the day after the Prime Minister had said if there's consensus, I would support one. And he said so very explicitly, even going so far, as we mentioned in the introduction, to say he's willing to do what he said he was not going to do during the campaign, which is put C-69 and the emissions cap on the table. Is that challenge going to prove to be as significant as it was over the last 10 years?
Well, I think he's going to have a choice to make in terms of whether he hangs on to people like Guilbeault or not. It's not a shock that Stephen Guilbeault came out and said those things. Like, this is a guy who literally is being arrested and jailed for his environmental radicalism. Like, this is not a guy who bends his principles on these things, and he's a militant. Like, he But the things that he's militant about around the environment, such as emission caps and pipelines, are the opposite of what Carney campaigned on. He campaigned on making progress on resource corridors and pipelines and the like. And to Scott's point, I think it's a moment of greater consensus around those issues due to the crisis we're facing with trade with the United States. But I don't think that Stephen Guilbeault is going to fall in line. I think he needs to fall out of caucus, frankly.
I guess I'll build off that question, Kathleen, and ask, like, does everybody need to be in line? Or is it possible, I mean, we didn't exist in this for the last 10 years, but is it possible that there are different points of view around the cabinet table, and ultimately a leader can say, thanks, I appreciate that, but I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
And the media doesn't immediately say, like, oh no, it's all over.
I mean, I think it's early days,
yeah.
But maybe he actually doesn't care if his cabinet ministers speak out of line. He's made it very clear that he is Prime Minister, in terms of his relationship with Trump, and it'll be his decisions that will be the priority. And I think that in your interview with him this past week, like, he really tried to display serious, calm leadership, right? He went back to his campaign messaging, which was a lot about, I'm going to be calm, not chaos. I'm going to be action-oriented, not angry, right? And I think that he's betting on the fact that the differences that might be around the cabinet table will bring him strength. That in fact, when other cabinet ministers, because it wasn't just only Guilbeault, there were some other strayers, and he's got some real talkers in his caucus. People like
not going to complain about that.
Yeah, no, not to complain, but I think that in a moment where he's differentiating himself from he's not that kind of over inauthentic kind of optimism of Trudeau, but he's also not the angry rhetoric of Pierre Poilievre, and he's going to lead. Whether it's going to come true or not. I mean, I don't know if the decision not to actually table a budget budget this week was the right one. I mean, sure, creating the tax cut, that is an easy way to put some points on the scoreboard. Everyone's going to fall in line behind that policy. But whether we'll think back and, 6 months from now, was it a mistake not to define what the fiscal framework was, what the goalposts are for your government, remains to be seen.
I guess we were all together on cabinet swearing in, and it sort of brings me back to, I think, Scott, what you have said frequently, which is like, and Nick Nanos also alludes to this, like there is a real pressure on the Prime Minister to make good on the message he's selling, which is like, I and I alone can be change, and I can enact change quickly. Like it isn't just a message of, over time things are going to change for you guys. It's like, I'm going to transform this economy and I'm going to do it quickly. It's a very big promise to make.
No question about it. And I first of all, I think he sincerely believes that. I think he sincerely believes he's a mission-built prime minister, that he's here as a consequence of this moment that we find ourselves in. And yeah, I think he thinks, to be blunt, that he has the talent and the opportunity to do it. So, I'll just pick up on your question about Guilbeault and ministers speaking out. I think he's going to be a lot more tolerant about people, developing their own point of view, maybe expressing their own point of view. I think he'll allow, some independent poles of authority and strength appear in his cabinet, maybe in ways that we haven't seen for a number of years. But, and it's a big but, when the Prime Minister has spoken already, and he says, this is core to my agenda, and I am moving, do not contradict him. And I don't think, like Corey, that Guilbeault is going to get kicked out of caucus or kicked from cabinet to the backbenches. But use your head. If it's something that the Prime Minister has not yet declared himself on, then I think people will have a long leash and the ability and the freedom to express points of view and explore opportunities and issues. But do not be going out and contradicting the boss on something this fundamental to the message that he has struck and the agenda that he has set forth and that you just got elected on.
Well, and it's so interesting in the case of Guilbeault, Corey, because you can envision a scenario in which he very easily in this instance could have said, you know where I stand, right? So you're not compromising your own principles, which, as you point out, are what they are. But it's not my file anymore. I'm heading into cabinet. Like, you didn't have to stop and say all that you did.
He didn't have to do any of that, except the guy is a radical, and I don't think he cares about team play. I've seen no evidence of team play from Stephen Guilbeault in his entire political career. But I told, maybe he won't be thrown out of caucus. I agree with that. It's an overstatement on my part. But I think he should be thrown out of cabinet, because the whole point of cabinet is, that there is a boss, there is a message, there is, election campaign platform, and the people who are given the most power to implement that platform are in cabinet. And if you are an outlier, if you don't like what the party ran on, or you have a problem communicating and falling in line, you should not be in cabinet. And I think those are absolute rules in every government I've ever seen. And I think he's going to have to fall in or fall out. But he's playing with a lot more than Mark Carney's political popularity and campaign promises. He's playing with the future of the country. Like, there's a reason why, there's going to be a referendum on separation in Alberta. There's a reason why there are a lot of people very, very angry in Western Canada. And it's because of the approach of Stephen Guilbeault and Justin Trudeau to resource development. And Mark Carney is supposed to be a break from that history and having a reset in those relationships. That's not going to happen as long as Stephen Guilbeault is running around running his mouth.
I think there's two reasons there's going to be a referendum. The first, Kathleen, is definitely anger, coming from people who feel alienated. The second is the Premier of the province made it a lot easier for there to be a referendum. I'll give you the last word on what Corey was mentioning.
Well, Corey switched his favorite topic being, Pierre Poilievre's bad campaign to now let's, say bad things about Guilbeault. But I don't know. I think that Carney this week, created his cabinet. I think that he may have set a strategic trap for Conservatives and New Democrats by basically, not putting out the budget first and basically kind of pushing them back into this procedural whining that you've already seen them do, tenfold, saying, we need to have a budget now. And I think that that's more interesting to me is will we fall into, when the House returns on the 26th, the same kind of patterns that we've seen for the last 2 years, where basically the opposition parties obstruct but for useless process things and don't actually, and then Carney gets to differentiate himself in some ways by saying, I'm the Prime Minister of Action. I mean, you can even look at the two leaders. I mean, the New Democrats don't have a caucus that is able to do this, but, you know, we have one leader in Pierre Poilievre who's controlling his caucus and not allowing them to speak. And it seems like so far in early days, we have Prime Minister Carney who's letting his cabinet ministers talk about everything from housing prices to pipelines.
And contradict him.
And contradict him. Yeah.